best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Yes, hello, good evening, and welcome to a spooky live stream. Happy Halloween, everybody. This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews. We are back for another live stream, live reading. Tonight, we shall be conducting a black magic ceremony to communicate with the spirit of the archetypal demonic force of international relations, Zbigniew Brzezinski. And we will be gathering around our demonic sigil. We'll be reading from the book, starting at the back, and we'll read the book backwards tonight because that's, you do these things backwards, don't you? So you can get in touch with these kind of spooky spirits. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I've never read a book backwards before. We'll be starting with the index and working our way through that. So it's going to be a very exciting read tonight. Good evening, everybody. How are you all doing? I hope you're doing well. It is lovely to have you here tuning in live. Heidi, Frank, Turbs, Bitcoin Mining, and ESP. And I know Melissa's out there as well listening in, but she's unable to comment because technology, eh? How about that? That technology, so convenient, so helpful, so useful, brings so much potential and possibility into our lives, so much freedom. Remember, the promise of technology was that we'll automate all the work and you can just live lives of leisure, making art, planting vegetables in your garden, walking the dog, doing all the things that you actually want to do with your time instead of working for fiat currency that gets constantly devalued through a process called inflation and requires a economic reset, otherwise known as a depression, once or twice every 100 years. Instead of that, once the automation is here, there'll be no work to do. Everything will be taken care of by robots and we'll all be living the life of Riley. Still waiting for that to happen. But in the meantime, we've got to deal with all this technological nonsense, and things go wrong and comments don't work and live streams stutter and buffer even though you've done all the things that their support team tells you to do. So it's frustrating, but we can persevere and we can overcome. And I think doing so makes us stronger. It builds our character. It makes us better able to deal with the challenges that we face in life. And we do face a lot of challenges. We've got a lot of strange stuff coming up. I don't mean just tonight. I mean in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. If the last 5 years are anything to go by, who knows what they have in store for us. I'm going to go back to my usual lighting right now. The silly spookiness is that section is over. Press this little button here. Boom. I am experimenting with a slightly different lighting setup tonight, so let me know if this is better or worse, easier on the eyes or harder. I appreciate any and all feedback. But yeah, we're continuing tonight with Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. This is part 10 in the series. I was checking earlier that the longest series we've done is 16 parts when we were reading the Milner-Fabian conspiracy. And I think we might hit 16 parts with this book, even though it's much shorter. There's just so much to comment on. There's so much in here that I think is worthy of slow, careful exploration to pick it apart and question it and really read between the lines, right? The book's called Between Two Ages. The method is between the lines. I've thought about a tagline. You've got to read the lines before you can read between them. Something catchy like this, right? And I think this is what we're trying to do here. So we slow down, and I tend to interject with a lot of comments and observations and reactions, and I hope that doesn't interfere with people's learning. I think it is worthwhile, and I'm trying to demonstrate what we can all do. There's nothing special about me except maybe my obsession with buying books. But that's not special. That's probably more of a disability than anything. But if you can get your hands on physical books, sit down, read them, take your time, react to the words on the page, see how it compares to your existing knowledge or understanding of a topic, to your life experience, to the things that you know and understand and that other people have told you. And it's a real worthwhile endeavor, because the alternative is to sit and watch the 6 o'clock news and get your download of information, or tune in to your favorite talking head who, let's face it, is very likely to be some sort of operative, some sort of controlled, authorized speaker, and they'll give you some truth because otherwise you wouldn't listen to them. But they might not give you all the truth, and they might slip some little poison pills in there as well. Who knows what crazy avenues of nonsense and fake research they could be leading you down. So it's all about slowing down, doing a bit of due diligence, and not expecting someone else, myself included, to do all the heavy lifting for you, right? I am truly honored and grateful that people tune into the show and check my work out and come along with me for the ride as we go through these books. But I'm not the authority. I'm not the person to trust and believe in. And my opinions are just my opinions. My ideas are just my ideas. You have to forge your own in the crucible of the modern world, where I still think books are our best source of information. And yes, Grokipedia was launched recently, and from my very cursory dives into it, it does look better than Wikipedia. There's some things on there that are more even-handed. It seems to be less ideologically driven, a bit more balanced. But, it's called Grokipedia. It's made by Elon Musk and his team. So is it going to give you everything you need? No, of course it's not. It's another campsite on the way up the mountain, right? If you think of the pursuit of truth and the attempt to understand reality as a climb up a mountain, there are all these camps as you're going up, and these camps, they've got a little fire going and a little pot of stew and a delicious smell wafting around, and they might have a tent with some furry sleeping bags in there, and they've got one waiting for you, and they might have all manner of goodies and luxuries and comforts, right? And you're looking up that mountain and you're going, I haven't got much food left in my backpack, and I've got blisters on my feet. Maybe I'll just lie down here in this little camp and I'll listen to what these people are saying around this campfire. And before you know it, you give up on the journey up the mountain altogether, and you just stay in that camp. Now, that's the metaphor, I think, that best explains all these talking heads and all these authorized content creators who are put out there. And I'm not going to name names, because it's up to you to follow your own intuition, to follow your own research and learning, and to see who is trustworthy and not. You got to make your own mind up on that. People will probably look at me and go, that guy's controlled opposition because whatever reason they come up with, some hand gesture I did, maybe I focused on a number too many times. 2, see the number 2? Oh, 2. He's a Gnostic dualist. I don't know, right? People look for all these signs and symbols and ways to discredit, and that's fine. It's a lot of fun. This is the entertaining side of the conspiratainment world that we get sort of drawn into when we reject the mainstream. So be diligent and take responsibility for your own thoughts and opinions and views on things. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, as I always say, read some books, grab some books, talk about books, start a book club. I gave you a nice tool in last week's intro to a framework for starting up your own research group. It was called Co-Creative Learning. And the website was cocreativelearning.org, had the process, the methodology, and it was pretty old school. But if you can find a group of curious people, get together, choose a question to focus on, and start gathering your information and meet once a week to compare your notes and start building a map, there's only one truth. Truth is belligerent. It exists. It is objective. The objective reality that we live in. So if you do a proper search for truth, you will arrive at the truth. But it's a climb up a mountain, and mountain conditions can be unforgiving, can be cold. There can be snow leopards up there, blizzards. There can be avalanches, all sorts of dangers. And that is why the little campfire with the person telling stories is much more alluring and comforting. And just saw a message that Dars is literally eating stew right now. Well, I don't know about you or anybody else in the chat, but that proves to me that you are obviously controlled opposition, Dars. So yeah, we better pay very close attention to whatever you write in the chat from now on. But no, enjoy the stew. I hope it's got lots of delicious meat in there. Melissa is in the chat as well, saying, I can't comment unless I'm sitting down at the desk at the computer. Huh. Okay. That's a strange problem. That's a strange tech problem. I don't know why you're having that problem. I wish I could sort it out for you. But you've got, by the sounds of it, some chores to be doing. So good luck. Not good luck, because chores aren't usually dangerous, but enjoy doing those. And I hope you enjoy tonight's broadcast as well. Don't worry about not being able to comment. Comments are always appreciated. It helps make the number go up, as I talked about in a previous live stream. The main game that most people are focusing on today is make number go up. And that's what we like to do, see the numbers go up, the thumbs and the likes and the views and the subs and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff, right? Make number go up. Wonderful, indeed. But it's not all about numbers in this life. It's about vibration and connection and frequency and being able to create spaces where human beings, human individuals can meet to exchange their spirit, their soul, their essence, their creative output, whatever it may be, music, art, talking, right? My creative output is sitting here without a plan and just talking, and I'm making it up off the top of my head on the fly, spontaneously, and I don't have a note in front of me that I have to follow or a script that I have to read. Of course, the books, we read the books, and I don't have anything to do with what's written in the books. But the rest of it is just me ad-libbing, making it up on the spot. And that's my creative output. To me, that's like jazz. It's like improvisation. It is kind of like these rappers that you might see. There's a great guy on YouTube called Harry Mack. If you've never seen this guy, I would go and watch some Harry Mack videos, and he is a freestyle rapper. He puts some music on. He gets people to give him random words, and then he'll freestyle a rap and incorporate all those words, no matter how random and crazy and bizarre and strange they might be. And he does it flawlessly. And every time I watch him, it gives me such a great sense of appreciation for the human creativity, because it's incredible to see. There's nothing quite like somebody who can improvise and make up something wonderful in the moment. And of course, a lot of preparation and planning and practice goes into that, whether that's some music or art or something. But watching somebody spontaneously create something is one of the greatest joys in life, I think. And that is what every conversation that we have with each other can be. That is what every moment we spend making silly noises and singing silly songs to our children. For example, I make up songs and sing them to my son all the time. And I make up the music and I make up the words, and sometimes it rhymes, sometimes it sounds stupid, and I've got too many syllables in the line or whatever it might be. But it's fun, it's spontaneous, it's creative, and that is what we can do. That is part of our humanity, I think. And so we can come together and we can have those experiences, and we can keep that alive, because we're being standardized. We are being homogenized. We're being squashed and conformed, and we're put into uniforms, and we're being analyzed and tracked and traced and databased and nudged and poked and prodded and manipulated and altered because they want to make us all the same, pretty much. They want to make us all be predictable so that when we hear a certain sound or see a certain event, they know exactly what we're going to do. They're pretty much there with all the data gathering that's been going on since the internet was rolled out. But that is the plan, right? So the antidote to that is to be unpredictable. And the way you can be unpredictable is to be spontaneous. And the best frame within which to be spontaneous is some sort of creative output. So pick up your guitar or write a poem or grab a piece of paper and a pen and just start doodling. Do something spontaneous and creative, and I think you'll feel better for it afterwards. That would be the way I will sell that particular idea to you. So thank you for being here tonight. It is indeed good to have you all. We've got R. Murray 1 as well over on Rumble. How's it going, sir? Or madame? I think you're a sir, so we'll see. But apologize if I've just used the wrong honorific there. We're continuing tonight with the book. I don't have much of a preamble ramble prepared, no extra resources to go through. I've pretty much given up on those at this point. One, it takes a lot of time to dig them up and go through them and prepare them, which I don't have these days. Two, we got so much of the book left. Still, we aren't even halfway through it, that I think it's better we crack on with the book and read it and see what other crazy things he has written in there for us to explore. Now, in last week's video, there was a big section on communism, a wonderful topic, very interesting indeed. Communism, one of the most deadly ideologies to be unleashed upon the human race. Oh, sorry, R. Murray 1 says it's they, them. Okay, they. Okay, they. They, them. Okay, them. Good. I hope they are having a wonderful evening. Gets so confusing when you start to play the pronoun game. My favorite one was always, I identify as a conspiracy theorist. My pronouns are, I told you so. That one always gives me a chuckle when I see that written in people's bios. I've tried to add it to my bio in, I think it was Instagram, but it wouldn't let me. They have like a preset list of acceptable pronouns. You can't make up your own. So I couldn't get that in there, unfortunately. But last week, we were reading about communism, and it was Zbignew's kind of, I would say, authorized account of communism and its origins and its purpose and its effects, because he left a lot out of the story, naturally. Although, surprisingly, he did give a little wink and a nod and an acknowledgement to Anthony Sutton, who he mentioned in a footnote. He mentioned Anthony C. Sutton's book, what is it called? Western something, Soviet Development? I don't know. I don't have those books. They're super hard to get hold of. Western Technology and Soviet Economic Development. There you go. I almost got it. So Anthony C. Sutton's, it's a trilogy of books, in fact. Western Technology and Soviet Economic Development. Anthony Sutton did a lot of digging, proper research, proper scholarly research. Found out that actually the West did a lot of funding of Soviet technological development. That's strange. I thought the communists and the free market capitalists in the West were enemies, right? No, they're cooperating at the very highest levels. They're helping each other out. And the communism was really a project of the West, of the financiers who poured money into it. Also documented in Anthony Sutton's book, Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. Just checking the title of that. It's up there on a quite high shelf. Yes. So it was unexpected to see Zbigniew mention Anthony Sutton, but it was a nice tie in there between the Mr. Mainstream Zbig, tying into somebody who's often mentioned and talked about in the conspiracy circles of research. So that was good to see. Zbig in the last section talked about how his version of communism, right? He didn't talk about how it was funded. He didn't talk about how Marx was commissioned and Engels were commissioned to write the manifesto. He described it as more of this organic thing that just happened, like a lot of history and a lot of the developments and the progress that we live through is framed as organic and natural, and the hidden hand and the planners and the controllers behind it and above it and around it, they are the missing piece that are left out and not talked about in many cases. And Zbig did the same thing, true to form. And he talked about the ethical underpinning of communism as Marxism as an ideology, and how it was he called it a Promethean humanism, right? And I do have a few notes here. Actually, that was my speech about like, oh, I have no notes. I'm just saying this off the top of my head. I do have a few notes to help me recap the content of the reading last week. Full disclosure, because my memory is bad. Who are we? Who am I? What are we doing here? What's all this about? But he called it a Promethean humanism. Now, humanism links into Julian Huxley and his explanation of the philosophy of UNESCO. He said it has to be a scientific humanism. And then Julian Huxley, of course, then went on to one-up humanism and coined the term transhumanism, which we are seeing rolled out in the modern day as well, with all the gene editing that is promised, and all the upgrades that we're going to enjoy, and all the chips under the skin, and all the enhancements, and all the kind of organs that are grown. And there's a new thing going on at the minute where they're using brain cells in computing. I think Melissa has talked about that in one of her recent videos. Very creepy stuff. Super creepy. If the idea of people creating computers out of human brain cells doesn't send shivers up and down your spine, then I don't know what to say. Because that is one of the creepiest things I've ever heard. Oh, really very fitting for Halloween. So Promethean humanism, Marxism, in Zbignew's terms, and he said it started with good intentions. It was a great system from the beginning, but then it was just taken over by bad people, and it was there was some what was the phrase he used? Right, I'm going to dig into my memory now. He called it something like a moral cost. He said it was morally costly or something like that, meaning 6.5+ million people. I don't know how many million people, but at least 6.5 million people dead. Oh, it was a bit morally costly was the terminology that he used. So really giving us an insight into this psychopathic view of things, where you can coldly assess a system of control and management of human beings that leads to so much death as, well, it was a bit morally costly. And he actually said as well in the last section of the book that despite all the deaths under Stalinism, it might have been better. It might have been a blessing in disguise, because if that whole revolution hadn't have happened, then he said there might have been an even worse rampage done by the Tsarist regime in the name of nationalism. Yes, he actually said that. So he did call it a kind of a blessing in disguise. One of the other key points he mentioned as well is that communism came a bit too early. It just came a bit too early because they didn't quite have the technology that they needed to make it stick. He didn't say make it stick, that's my term, but that's what he was saying. He was like, oh, they didn't quite have the full spectrum dominance of surveillance and second-by-second data gathering that we now have to make it work. And that should be a big clue there about what's in store for us in the next few decades or so, because it's a type of communism 2.0. It's a type of, they've now got the surveillance. They've now got the instant ability to just lock you out of your bank account because you criticized our glorious leader, or you didn't say the right thing on the social media space, or you ate too much of this thing that you're not supposed to eat too much of, or you were associating with the wrong person, and boom, click of a button, automated decision, you're locked out of your bank account. I mentioned previously on the stream that I'm now completely locked out of Facebook. I'm unable to make an account on Facebook anymore, and there's no way for me to appeal it. There's no recourse, and it's not too big of a problem. I'm not that bothered. But they have the power to do this now. So instant punishments, meted out by algorithmic decision-making software, to keep people in line, to keep them standardized, keep them uniform, and getting everybody reacting and behaving and speaking and thinking in the same way, like I said at the start of the video. So he was talking about communism came too early. We didn't quite have the technology we needed back then to make it stick, which was a shame. You know, there was this kind of tone of, oh, it's a shame. It's a shame. He did talk about how it was a good ideology that was just sort of, it just went bad, and it was unexpected that it went bad, and really at its core it was an ethical humanist thing that had its sights set, that was necessary to bring people one step along toward a global one world system, new world order, one world government, technotronic type of system. So he viewed it as a kind of a necessary stepping stone towards what he and his ilk are trying to build. But he said it just went bad, that it was good in principle, like a lot of people. Well, you know, it's very good. It's a shame the way it panned out and all the millions of deaths and everything. Yeah, it's a shame about that. But if we did it properly, if we just did it right, it would be heaven on earth. It would be utopia. It would be paradise, you know. But it's the classic line, isn't it? We just didn't do it right. And he said that the ethical universalism of communism, of Marxism, was basically used by a small group of people to hoard wealth and get lots of power and influence for themselves. Which is just every system and every ideology and everything that's ever been rolled out and given to us. Any system, any ism, that is always the end result. It's a small group of people, massive amounts of wealth and power and privilege and luxury for themselves, and everyone else scrambling around trying to do what they can for the food that's left over and the fiat currency that's left over and the services that are left over and the resources and everything. So that really, that's the name of the game. Of course, Zbigniew does not acknowledge that. So that was the last section. It had some fairly interesting views, and I thought it was a good piece of kind of historical, not whitewashing exactly, but a good piece of telling a story about the way things happened that isn't true, right? It's kind of papering over and covering over certain realities, and I think this the fact that we live in these systems that are given to us, and every single one of them is designed to exploit the masses for the benefit of the dominant minority. That's kind of the overarching pattern of history that is never just plainly and simply said in those terms by these historians and these geopolitical heavyweights who enjoy such massive influence and power and prestige, right? So that's my summary. I did have a few notes for that. I hope that was useful. We've got a few comments in the chat. I'll read these out and then we'll get into the book. Frank Lennon says, say hello to them from me. Lovely, Frank says, lovely meal, silicone chips and gamma ray. Delicious. Heidi says, what an absolute idiot. Z-Big is one of the useful idiots, not judging. I was one of them. Well, aren't we all? Pretty much. Like, good luck finding someone who isn't a useful idiot. They are few and far between, that's for sure. Shannon Ramos. Hello, Shannon. Welcome. CIA Reading Room FOIA FOIA document. Proposed guest list. DCI Halloween party. 31st of October, 1979. White House. The President and Mrs. Carter, the Vice President and Mrs. Mondale, Dr. and Mrs. Zbigniew Brzezinski. Start date for the Soviet-Afghan War. This is a long read. In 1979 is December 24, 1979, when Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. Thank you for that little historical tidbit there. I appreciate you dropping in and sharing that with us. Happy Halloween to you too. Lee Blunt says, whose utopia and paradise is he talking about? Yes, that's the thing. Well, the word utopia itself literally means nowhere. It doesn't exist. And utopia, for the people who often talk about it, is everyone else slaving away while this dominant class gets to live off their labor and not contribute anything themselves. That tends to be the case. Paradise, utopia, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So anybody talking about these concepts and how we're going to bring it about, it's going to be a workers, what do they call it? Like a workers' dictatorship or something like that. They're always harnessing people's good intentions and desire to see fairness and justice and equality. These things are always rolled out in the name of some high-minded ideal thing that really never manifests, and we're never allowed to achieve it. That's what history shows us anyway. So why should the next one be any different? But I think that's all I got for Preamble Ramble tonight. Let's get into the book reading. I hope you're all doing well. We seem to be broadcasting smoothly to Rumble and fix it, but we'll see. Watch this space for that. I just got a message saying OBS had disconnected from the internet as well. Halloween. I mean, you got to expect some technical glitches on Halloween, right? Well, thank you all for tuning in. I know it's Halloween. You could all be out trick-or-treating. You could all be out collecting chocolate from your neighbors, but instead you're here. And I appreciate that. Frank says there's a little latency. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Well, I'm recording it, so I'm going to continue. And if it goes kaput, I will upload the recording after the fact, as is my only recourse, really, to deal with it. So we're going to continue tonight with, this is chapter 2. This is part 3 in the book, which is Communism, the Problem of Relevance. And it's chapter 2 in part 3. And it's called The Bureaucratization of Boredom. Now, I've got a kind of strange angle going on. Let me get comfortable here. The Communist Party of the Soviet Union has a unique achievement to its credit. It has succeeded in transforming the most important revolutionary doctrine of our age into dull social and political orthodoxy. That orthodoxy is revolutionary in rhetoric, but conservative in practice. The political system, highly centralized but arrested in its development, is seen by some Soviet citizens as increasingly irrelevant to the needs of Soviet society, as frozen in an ideological posture that was a response to an altogether different age. Soviet society, in which elements of urban modernity are combined with extensive rural backwardness, is no longer undergoing rapid revolutionary changes capable of mobilizing youthful elan. It seemed instead bent on simply matching the higher consumer standards of the capitalist West. Well, he's kind of acknowledging here what is revealed in the book on foundations that we're going to read next, which was that the plan all along, or the purpose of the foundations, was to merge the two systems, the East system and the West system. And so what he's describing here is just really part of that. They're going, oh, hang on a sec, we're just aping the consumer standards of the West. What gives? That's not what this system's supposed to be all about. Well, it is, but you're not supposed to know that. So continuing, under those circumstances, it becomes ideologically more and more difficult to justify the historical legitimacy and the social utility of Soviet society's continued subordination to a political system, embodying increasingly sterile 19th century doctrines. Indeed, the ultimate irony is that the Soviet political system, having thrust Russia into the mid-industrial age, has now become the principal impediment to the country's further evolution. The other thing he mentioned in the last section as well was how he did a sort of analysis of whether the communist revolution actually did anything for the country in terms of development and progress. And he mentioned a few scholars who were arguing that the country was on the same path of progress and development prior to the revolution taking place, and that the revolution itself didn't really achieve anything material. It was other forces, and it was already going in that direction, and it wasn't accelerated or improved by the revolution, which was quite an interesting point to be aware of. It keeps Russia in a mold that is industrial bourgeois socially and dogmatic authoritarian politically. For the USSR to become a truly modern society, the basic assumptions and structure of the political forms created to press industrialization must be changed. A more relevant vision of tomorrow than that provided by the official ideology is also needed to cope with the highly personal as well as the broader social concerns of the technotronic age. The next section is the innovative relationship. At one point, the Soviet political system was in a revolutionary relationship to society. Consolidated and subsequently subordinated to the will of one man, the political system imposed a process of radical transformation on society by combining modernization, largely through intense industrialization and mass education, with ideologically derived novel social institutions and relationships. In effect, the function of the political system in Soviet society parallels what Marx described as the capitalist's principal role in history. Quote, fanatically bent on making value expand itself, he ruthlessly forces the human race to produce for production's sake. He thus forces the development of the productive forces of society, and he creates those material conditions which alone can form the real basis for a higher form of society. A society in which the full and free development of every individual forms the ruling principle. Domestic revolutionary change fulfilled the ideological needs of the ruling elite without pushing that elite into foreign revolutionary ventures that might have jeopardized its power. The new ruling elite was apprehensive lest premature ideological zeal prove its undoing, yet it was also ideologically compulsive. Socialism in one country, Stalin's famous answer to Trotsky's permanent revolution, was a brilliant coup, for it fused the dedicated revolutionaries' genuinely ideological aspirations with their newly acquired taste for office. Socialism in one country allowed the new rulers to retain their ideological self-righteousness and their positions. More basically, the new one-country concept defined a specific, innovative role for the political system in relationship to society. The political system became the principal source of dynamism for social change, setting goals and defining priorities. Once society had taken the desired shape, however, and began to mirror the official aspirations of the political rulers, who had in the meantime been transformed into bureaucratic officials, the momentum for social change started to wane. In late 1952, Stalin hinted that in his view there was still need for further ideologically derived and politically directed social transformation. Subsequently, Khrushchev on several occasions strove to infuse the relationship between the political system and society with new programmatic content. At one time, he suggested a dramatic reconstruction of the Soviet countryside into so-called agricultural cities. Later, he attempted to define new ideological goals linked to Soviet society's ultimate transition from socialism to communism. When that effort in social innovation, spelled out by the party's ideologues in the new party program adopted in 1961, turned out to be little more than a shopping list of additional material benefits to be enjoyed by the Soviet people sometime in the 1980s. Khrushchev turned his attention to the party itself and began to toy with the notion of redefining its role. In 1962, he pushed through a drastic reform that, in effect, split the party into two separate organisms, one devoted to agricultural matters and the other to industrial problems. As he explained it, quote, "The production line is the main one. The main thing in communist construction is economics, production, the struggle for the creation of material and spiritual goods for the life of man. I don't think I never thought of communism as particularly interested in spiritual goods for the life of man. I thought it was a sort of materialistic, atheistic type of system, and that's how so many people were slaughtered underneath it, right? What spiritual goods is it providing for the life of man exactly? But continuing. Though Khrushchev's reform ran the risk of transforming the party into two separate, essentially managerial-oriented hierarchies, and was for that reason immediately undone by Khrushchev's successors after his overthrow in the late 1964, it did reflect a recognition that the relationship between the political system and the society had become dysfunctional, that if the political system was no longer defining new, grandiose ideological objectives for society, then the system itself had to be reformed in keeping with the more routine operational requirements of Soviet society, which had by now acquired the technical and industrial wherewithal for its own further steady growth. Sensing that the party was in search of a new role, Khrushchev was prepared to make the necessary reforms. Defensive orthodoxy. Khrushchev's successors rejected his view and opted instead for relatively minor adjustments, primarily in economic planning and control, simultaneously re-emphasizing the imperative necessity of ideological orthodoxy and more vigorous ideological indoctrination. Yes, that's it. We just need to make more we need more indoctrination. People are complaining, they're unhappy, they're starving to death, and they're not doing it quietly and with dignity. We need more indoctrination. Under the post-Khrushchev regime, there has been neither a definition of new ideological goals nor any major tampering with the political structure. As a consequence, official views on the state of Soviet society, on foreign affairs, on the problems of the future, and on the nature of contemporary communism contain strikingly little recognition of the novel problems that beset man, either in terms of his personal condition or as a member of the emerging global community. Difficult problems are simply swept under the ideological rug. Yeah, there's always that disconnect, isn't there, between theory and practice, or ideology and reality. And I noticed this even in corporate, like even in jobs in the corporate world. There's this conversation about how things should work and the processes and the structures and the frameworks in which we do our jobs, do our work. And this is supposed to happen in such and such a way, and this document links to this one, and here's the order of things. But then there's actual reality, and there's what's actually going on and what the people are actually doing. And I always struggle to kind of bridge this gap. And I particularly struggle to listen to the people who don't talk about the actual reality of what's going on, and instead just talk about the ideology and the abstract concepts and ideas and processes and frameworks and structures and everything. Because you can come up with that stuff, but most of the time it doesn't actually work, and it's not working, and it doesn't help. Okay, and I feel like this is a little bit of an account of that. It's trying to make humanity and human beings fit into an artificially man-made system, right? The management, the production, the jobs, the working hours, the currency, all that kind of stuff. It's artificial and man-made, and then they have this question. I say they, meaning like the world controllers and the architects and planners of these systems. They then have the problem of, right, we got to make people fit these systems that we've designed now. It's not we'll make the systems to align with humanity and to benefit humanity. It's the other way around. It's kind of like we'll make the system as we want it to be, and then we'll hammer the people into shape to fit them into the holes and the roles that we have designated. And this is like the role of the bureaucrat. This is the role of the the planner, the think tank expert, the analyst, the academic, the person, in other words, who doesn't produce anything of any value, tangible, real value in the world. And all they want to do is sit there with a whip and a clipboard and tell other people to work harder and faster and better, and to, mark them and grade them on their performance and their work and their productivity. It's the managerial class all over. And, this section is about bureaucracy and bureaucratization. But it's pretty dry and boring to read, in my view, these little accounts of who tweaked what, and the idea that this person came up and the system needs to be sort of altered. And what's really going on is there's an anti-human system, and they're trying to beat people into submission to that anti-human system. But I know that, like, Zbigniew, he's an academic and an expert, so he can't really say it in those plain terms. That's for me to do. But anyway, continuing. Under the post-Khrushchev regime... Oh, hang on, we already did that bit. On the domestic front, the prevailing official view has been that the Soviet Union, having completed socialist construction, is now laying the foundations of a communist society, and that existing problems are essentially instrumental, needed to improve the efficiency of a system that in its basic assumptions and organization is officially considered to be the most advanced and just in the world. By who? What? Hang on. On the domestic front. This is a confusing sentence to me. Who's going around saying that the communistic system is the most advanced and just in the world? I suppose the likes of the Fabian socialists and all the students who are indoctrinated by them might be believing this kind of narrative here. But the most just in the world, I mean... Don't forget about the moral costs of the building and the creation of this system, right? Continuing. The lag in socioeconomic development in some areas of Soviet life is ascribed either to the ravages of World War II or to the failures of the pre-revolutionary regime. The writings of revisionist Marxist thinkers on the problems of personal alienation in an advanced urban society, to say nothing of anti-Semitism in a socialist society, are dismissed as inappropriate to Soviet conditions or as malicious slander. The Soviet Union is said to have no generational problems, and only recently has urban crime been discussed as a phenomenon in its own right, and not merely as a legacy from the pre-revolutionary era. These views have been articulated in the context of intensified efforts to reassert and expand ideological training, thereby partially compensating for the decline of coercion as a key means of integrating Soviet society with the political system. Though the social scope of these efforts has been expanded in recent years, there is open acknowledgement of the fact that special attention has been focused on the new scientific community. Quote, "The party and the people want to see in scientists not only creators and organizers of scientific technical progress, but also political people, active fighters for the cause of communism." Be worth checking out where that quote came from, I think. We're looking at part 3, chapter 2, aren't we? Right, where is the age of volatile belief? We've done that bit. And no, this is it. Number 15. That's from the Intelligentsia in Socialist Society. Pravda, May 25, 1968. The quote. Oh, no, sorry, I just looked at the wrong number. It's actually 13. Party concern for the upbringing of the scientific technical intelligentsia. From, I think, a magazine or a publication called Communist with a K. Number 18, page 38. Yeah, so Heidi just made a good point in the chat that communism is ideology as religion, with the leaders being the priest class. Yeah, there's a religious aspect to it because it requires a lot of faith and belief and obedience and rules to follow. But there's also a scientific, technocratic aspect to it as well. So rather than it being religion in the sense of the spirit and soul and God and angels and demons and all that sort of stuff, the metaphysical side of things, it's kind of like a scientific rationalist ideology based in the material world, whereby physical reality, 3D reality, is what needs to be managed and organized and kept under control and divided up and given out equally and equitably to everybody. So there's a scientific technocratic layer to it as well, which this quote is kind of hinting at, right? The new scientific community, the special attention, and the organizers of scientific technical progress. But what is progress and who defines it? And progression towards what? But continuing here, we got a quote from Melissa as well. It says, if it helps anyone, clear history, et voila, live cat appears. Excellent so far, Nick. You gave me a rueful laugh. Nor dying with dignity. Tammy's here, late to the party, but better late than never. And Shannon also says, okay, I got to go back a bit. Bitcoin mining. Had to give my fingerprints to get into the EU today. There must be a murderer narrative going about, as that was the default excuse. Wow. The police at the airport said he had to do it to get into Turkey, so I have to do it. Wow. Biometrics. Yeah, that's it now. And then Shannon responded to that saying, sorry to hear about the fingerprint harvesting. I'm concerned over the ongoing online behavioral data and psychographic data harvesting. There was a good video as well about the recent digital ID protest in London, which was but David Icke was there holding up the banner, and it was led by another woman who I can't remember her name, or organized at least. She had a very well scripted and well edited video that was serious, and this is the hill to die on, and we got to go and show our support and say no to the digital ID. But then this fellow on YouTube, I think he's called Swilliamism, I think is the name of his channel. I haven't watched much of his stuff, but Frank in the chat shared some of his videos before. Swilliamism, he went back and he looked at the route of the march, and he saw that it had a strange route which took it past Scotland Yard when it didn't need to go past Scotland Yard. So he asked the organizer, he said, did you plan the route, or did the police at Scotland Yard plan the route? And she got angry at this question and gave him a mouthful. So he went back after the protest was over, and he had a look at the cameras that were outside Scotland Yard, and he deduced that they were indeed cameras that were capable of biometric facial recognition data gathering and harvesting. And he pulled up Google Maps and he showed that camera back in 2018 or 2019. It was a different camera. And then in 2020, when this facial recognition technology was kind of approved and started to be rolled out, the camera changed. So it was a very interesting video, very short, 15 minutes or something. But the idea is that the whole protest was guided past these facial scanning recognition cameras. So now they've got the facial record of everybody who was there, and they've got the facial record of everybody, I think, pretty much. There's nobody who hasn't been photographed at this point, I wouldn't have thought. That's part of giving us all the Black Mirror devices, giving us all these websites like Pinterest and Instagram. Hey, share pictures and cameras on the front and the back of all these devices, cameras built into the laptops and the tablets, and just normalizing this behavior of photographing everything all the time and uploading it to Facebook and Instagram and all these other websites where people do that. At this point, I don't think there's anybody who hasn't been photographed, and therefore I don't think there's anybody whose facial recognition and data isn't already on file. But I could be wrong. Heidi says, the technocrats and leaders are the alchemists, as Marina Abramovich calls Trump the greatest of magicians. It's funny you mentioned Marina Abramovich. She is putting on some kind of show here in Manchester. I don't know if it's already been on or if it's coming up. I know somebody who works in the local like council here who gets access to these events and gets offered tickets and whatnot for for as part of the job. And they were telling me that the invite came through to go to this particular venue for this Marina Abramovich event. And when he looked into it a little more, it's basically the way he described it to me was you get locked in for 4 hours, right? They lock the doors once you're in there. And then you just walk around inside, and each room has basically a different sex show going on. And you can't leave, and you can't take your phone in or something like that. It sounds really weird. I don't think they can lock people in, fire safety and health and safety kind of thing. So that might have been a slight exaggeration. But yeah, apparently she's coming to town. That's probably going on tonight, actually. It is Halloween, isn't it? So there's some people walking around enjoying a nice Marina Abramovich planned sex show. So, good for them. We're here reading Zbigniew Brzezinski instead, so I think that's a much finer way to spend Halloween. Melissa says, from Alan Watt CTTM, Swilliamism is great. Couldn't remember his name. Thrilled when Frank shared him. Yeah, he is good. I got to check more of his stuff out. He's a real good example of a British man. Polite, calm, but good-humored as well. He's not going for the clicks and the drama and the outrage and the fear porn and all that. He's genuinely concerned and genuinely doing good, I would say, authentic grassroots journalism. So definitely worth having a look. Right, okay, let's get back to the book. Otherwise, I'm going to be just here all night responding to your comments. Tarot Galaxy's here, though. I will say hello to Tarot Galaxy. Good to have you here. Where the heck was I? Oh, yeah, we're down here at the scientist bit, aren't we? So, in addition, there have been expressions of official concern over alleged ideological indifference among scientists, and what is even worse, over a tendency in these circles to consider technocrats the natural leaders of modern society. Okay? Oh no. Technocrats, the leaders of society. Technocrats, technocracy. I mean, communism is technocracy, isn't it? Because it's a managed society. It's a small group of experts and scientific elites who count up all the resources and dole them out, and so everything is managed. And you're told how much you have to produce and how much of it goes over to the people in the city and how much of it you get to keep on your little farm. So that's baked into the model, I think. Scientists, continuing, have repeatedly been warned, and the very warnings reveal the attitudes of Soviet scientists, not to view themselves as superclass humanists, but to identify closely with the class struggle and the people. Wow, it's quite interesting few points there, and they're all footnoted, those last 3 points, but scientists are being warned. You better sign up to the ideology. You can't be impartial. Which, isn't that what science is supposed to be? An impartial method for discerning truth and reproducing experiments that allow us to understand what is? Oh, but you better sign up to the communist ideology or else. But the next section, continuing, the issue of humanism appears to have been a particularly sensitive one. Humanism, a central Marxist concern, can serve as a point of departure for a critique of both Stalinism and the present Soviet system. So present in the 60s when he was writing this. Moreover, the dehumanizing potential of modern science has given new urgency to the problem of defining humanism in the modern world. The official view, stated authoritatively in a series of major articles in the key ideological journals, has been unequivocal. Quote, socialism is profoundly humanistic because it eliminates the exploitation of man by man. Accordingly, it is also humanistic when it erects the building of a new society at the price of extraordinary hardships in the persistent struggle against the old, It is also humanistic when conditions have already been created for the thorough development of the individual, but society is still compelled to control the activities of a person and his labor discipline, and, within the framework and in the interests of all of society and of the communist education of a particular individual, does not permit individuals to abuse the freedoms presented by socialism, does not permit people with an undeveloped sense of responsibility to violate the norms of the socialist community, suppresses the opposition of anti-socialist forces, etc. So even when millions of people are dying, socialism is still humanistic. What is that quote from? Let's have a look. 16. Number 16, let's see. It's probably some article from some journal, isn't it? Yeah, Chesnokov. But there's a little note here explaining this important article discusses the general state of contemporary Marxism, as well as the significance of contemporary revisionism. Yeah, so even when you're being forced to produce and having the product of your labor redistributed to other people and taken from you, and your lives are being technocratically, scientifically controlled and planned and managed, and people are dying and it's hard, and you only get to eat one potato a week, that's humanism. That's humanist, right? A lot of mental gymnastics here. But Zbignew's comment on that last quote, this argument has been buttressed by the assertion that the so-called eternal values, freedom, democracy, humanism, individual dignity, are a weapon in the hands of the bourgeoisie to mislead and fool the masses, and that the issue of Stalinism is essentially irrelevant. Yeah, just ignore the Stalinism, that little blip, that little necessary evil on the way to the establishment of a world communistic technocratic system. Continuing, views such as these have been expressed in the context of a broader emphasis on the argument that an ideological perspective on contemporary reality is absolutely essential in order to obtain accurate insight into that reality, and that scientific communism, as defined by the Soviet leaders, provides the only valid perspective. Although the latter is not a new proposition, there is novelty in the degree to which it has been linked in the more prestigious Soviet scholarly journals, as well as in mass media, with an attack on Western theories of ideological erosion, of the emergence of a general type of industrial society, and of the ubiquity of new bureaucratic political elites in all developed political systems. Soviet critics have made it clear that they view these theories as not only scientifically erroneous, but politically harmful and probably designed deliberately to undermine communism. Soviet scholars have been particularly vigorous in rejecting the theory of convergence of the Soviet and Western, particularly American systems. Oh, so they obviously weren't working for the foundations then. In the Soviet view, the crucial and distinctive element of the Soviet system, rule by the Communist Party as the expression of proletarian dictatorship. It's a dictatorship of the workers, dictatorship of the proletariat, isn't it? Has been underestimated by Western thinkers who have superficially focused on the external characteristics of a modern industrial society without delving more penetratingly into the question of its socio-political essence. Though some of the Soviet criticisms are not without merit, and there is a curious touch of neo-Marxist determinism in some of the Western theories of convergence, it is striking how much intellectual effort has been invested in asserting and proving the distinctive character of the communist system. It once again reveals the importance attached to the notion that the Soviet past is linked to a future that is absolutely distinctive and not part of a broader stream of man's political evolution. Right. Well, I feel like the Soviet scholars, they're bigging up their system because they'll get shot if they don't, or that's how you get ahead in that system. It's like you got to know where your bread's buttered, and if there's money to make a certain thing, to argue a certain thing is true, then you can go and argue that thing and make and support it and prove it, quote unquote, prove it in your articles and with your rhetoric and your persuasive skills of oratory and argumentation and use of the written word. Then I wouldn't be surprised that people are doing that in these kinds of systems where you know that resources are scarce and managed and carefully controlled, and there's a lot of spying and betrayal, and you don't know who's going to turn on who and who's going to rat you out, and all this kind of paranoia and intrigue, and it must be a horrific kind of society to live in. But then it's not surprised that you have scholars coming out saying this is the best society ever. You know, it reminds me of North Korea, where when their leader died and they had all the weeping and wailing, or the stories about people would stand up to clap and give these standing ovations, and nobody would want to be the first to sit down. Right, so people would clap and clap and clap and just keep clapping, and then eventually somebody would pass out through exhaustion. So all these bizarre situations and scenarios arise out of these kinds of systems, and I think again by design, because you saw the chaos, you saw the confusion, the suspicion, and then the masses are easier to manage. It's just another divide and conquer tactic, isn't it? Huge footnotes here that I'm not even going to read. So, continuing. It also makes possible the argument that the Soviet system is free of the dilemmas that beset contemporary man elsewhere, and it frees Soviet communists from the responsibility of engaging in a cross-ideological dialogue about these dilemmas. So yeah, this idea of convergence here that they mention is interesting to me, because when we know that the result of is it the Reese Committee in the Foundation's book? Is it called the Reese Committee? I always forget. Reese Committee, yeah, it's there. So when we know the result of the Reese Committee was that these foundations were working to merge these two systems, it's interesting that there were scholars, probably on both sides, who were flatly vigorously rejecting this, because that was the plan that you couldn't say out loud, right? That was the quiet part that you couldn't say out loud. But I think it's a good or a better or a accurate narrative to explain kind of what we're living through and what we're seeing happen in our own time, the merging of the two systems. Because there was something I saw on Telegram earlier today, which was about, I think, a mock-up of how a digital ID might work. Where did I see that? Here it is. Tony Blair Institute for Global Change has done this mock-up. Let me just get a screen grab of this and I'll share it because it's relevant to tonight's discussion. And I've got to move a few things around, though, before I can show you this. Let's make this full screen. Why is it not going full screen? That's really strange. Isn't it good when things that have never happened before start happening? When you are live on your broadcast. Digital ID. So I've got to save this picture, and then I've got to open a browser. And then I've got to put this picture in the browser so you can all see it and I can share it with you. But I think it's going to be worth it, because you might not have seen this before, because I only saw it for the first time today. So, and this was in Ian Davies' Telegram group, which is a really good group. A lot of good stuff gets shared in there. And Ian Davies has a new book coming out, which is also good for us as well. Right. So a bit of on-the-fly, unplanned stuff going on here. But this has apparently come from the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, and it's how digital ID might work. And there's a section here on reporting issues, and it says keep your community clean and safe. And then it says report new issue, and there's a bunch of buttons: fly tipping, vandalism, noise complaints, fraud, street lighting, road damage. And then at the bottom it says community impact, reports made, issues fixed, in progress. And it says your active reports. And the comment by the person who shared this says, Tony Blair's Institute for Global Tyranny is already showing with this screenshot and the community impact how the values-based Western social credit system is being designed. Anyone who submits a lot of reports, for example, for noise pollution, gets points. So that's it. That's the automatic system of dobbing in your neighbor who's doing something you don't like, of spying on each other, of keeping each other in line. And it's disgusting and it's despicable and it's horrible that it's coming to this. But it's just an example of how people shouldn't be so, what's the word? Overconfident. Well, it can never happen here. You know, this is the West. It can never happen in the West. We've got capitalism. We got liberal values. We got Pride Month. Everything's good here. We're respectful. We tolerate everybody. We love immigrants and multiculturalism. And we are at the peak of moral and ethical progress. Well, all well and good until they roll out this dob your neighbor into the government system. And the app on your phone where you can just, oh yeah, and you'll see people on the street looking at each other and, you know, they're like, oh, I saw that. Oh, I got my phone. You know, and it's in the Black Mirror episode Nosedive. And it's a terrifying, horrible place to be. But they've done this in other places before. You want to read Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, for example. We know they're lying. They know we know they're lying. They know we know that they know we know they're lying, and yet they continue to lie. These are the kind of situations that you end up in. And they know that how to bring a society of people to that point because they've done it before, and they gathered the data and they rolled it out and they assessed it in that cold, psychopathic, calculating way that Zbigniew Brzezinski did in the last reading. Oh yeah, it was a bit morally costly, you know, with all the millions of deaths. But we got so many telephones out into people's homes and so many televisions and, you know, look at the things we produced and the material benefits that came out of it. So don't think that it can't happen. And that merging of the two systems, you know, you can see it. You can see that we're on the verge of it already. And as I've said before, you got to really just ditch the smartphones altogether. Otherwise, you're going to be seeing other people tapping on their little apps to send a message to the government that you said a hurty word, or you didn't pick up your sweet wrapper that you dropped on the floor, or the dog poo that you didn't pick up when you took your dog for a walk, or all hundreds of thousands of other infractions that you can't even possibly imagine will start coming into play. And you won't even believe how fast they can roll that out and bring us to that point, you know. Shannon Ramos says, Norman Dodd told us. Yes, exactly, he did. Yeah, an app to turn everyone into a Karen, Shannon says, yeah. That's it. Bitcoin mining doesn't know what a Karen is. Well, you can, I don't know, you could probably just YouTube videos of Karens going crazy. Just type something in like Karen goes crazy. I just saw we got Smith & Jones over on Rumble. Good evening to you. But let's continue with the book. The official... So we're here, I think, aren't we? Yeah. The official Soviet definition of foreign problems is characterized by similar intellectual inflexibility. This is not to say that the Soviet leadership and elite are misinformed or ignorant about basic facts or developments. There is no doubt that the level of Soviet overt and covert reporting of world affairs has improved considerably, and that factual misrepresentation, designed to meet anticipated ideological preferences, has declined. Specialized Soviet scholarly journals on Africa or Asia, Soviet analyses of the common market, or Soviet efforts to develop systematic studies of the United States go beyond purely ideological formulas and reject the importance attached to the deeper understanding of regional developments. Some scholarly Soviet journals on world affairs, for example, Mirovaya Ekonomika I Mez... Oh, I can't read that. Crazy Russian words. Compare very favorably with the best Western counterparts in terms of systematic coverage, documentation, and scholarly rigor. So, well, that's really just an example of how the two systems are merging, isn't it? If the Soviets started to produce the same kinds of scholarly journals and studies that the West did. Specialized research institutes, such as the Institute of World Economy and International Affairs. Wow, that's quite a... I've never heard of that particular institute before, but it says it right all there, doesn't it? You got the Royal Institute for International Affairs, and now over in Russia, well, not now, but whenever this was, you got the Institute of World Economy and International Affairs, are apparently being more frequently consulted in the preparation of policy. So they even started listening to the think tanks and getting the experts to drum up the policy and the plans of where to take things and how to run the societies. So again, the merging of the systems, they're one's becoming like the other. And the dialectic that people are led to believe, again, being shown to be bogus and just a narrative that's given to people to keep them busy, to keep them worried and scared and concerned and on the back foot and busy running on the hamster wheel because they got to make number go up and not paying no mind to the plan, the agenda, the future, where it's going. Make sure they don't have enough time to read the books that explain it and talk about it. That's part of it as well. So apparently the Soviets created the Institute of World Economy and International Affairs, and this became more frequently consulted in the preparation of policy, and this doubtless contributes to greater sophistication in the decision-making process. And I just see we've got MindHack as well. Good evening, MindHack. Hope you're doing all right. So continuing. Yet, in spite of this, the Soviet conception of the broad framework of contemporary reality, as articulated by top leaders and even as presented in scholarly journals, remains fundamentally dogmatic. The basic premise continues to be the Manichaean notion of the antagonistic dichotomy between the socialist and the capitalist worlds, or between good and evil. Though war between these two worlds is no longer said to be fatalistically inevitable, and the destructiveness of nuclear weapons dictates the necessity of peaceful coexistence, indeed, sometimes even closer cooperation is tactically desirable because of other considerations, for example, the Sino-Soviet conflict. The underlying reality of our age is still said to be the competition between the two systems. Quote, two antagonistic socio-economic systems are pitted against each other today in a struggle of unprecedented scope and violence which affects the life of human society in all its aspects. The antagonists are capitalism and socialism. That is a fine piece of Hegelian dialecticism right there, isn't it? Eventually, one or the other will have to prevail, and Soviet analysts are confident that they know which one it will be. This theme runs like a thread through all major speeches, foreign policy analyses, and or scholarly commentaries on world affairs. There's a little footnote here that I will go to. It says, thus, a Soviet scholar, in an ambitious effort to analyze contemporary world affairs, asserts that the outcome of the competition rules out accident. Victory or defeat are necessary, that is, unavoidable, and law-governed. Defeat comes but once in such competition. There will be no return match, no replay, no chance of revenge. So it's an insight, really, into the propaganda and the conditioning that was being done to the communist society, the people living under that system. And the same thing is going on our side. Our system will prevail. Our system is the one that cares about freedom. They're jealous of our system. They want to tear our system down because of all the great things that we have and the fantastic life we have. When there weren't, what were the big differences between the systems, really? And what I notice pretty much always gets left out when you're comparing the two systems is money and the finance and who was printing the money and where was the money coming from and which families were sitting on the printing machines and controlling the currency and that side of things. It's never talked about. these assessments and discussions of capitalism and socialism and communism, they just happen to leave out the banking cartel that runs all of them and gets rich off all of them, right? But continuing. It would be an error to dismiss the above as merely a ritualistic act of obeisance to doctrine, or to view it as a sign of fanatical and implacable militancy. Its importance lies in the influence of the ideological framework on more immediate and otherwise quite well-informed policy judgments. Though far from committing Soviet leaders to short-term militancy, the ideological framework does inhibit them from thinking of accommodation and stability as ends in themselves, since that would be tantamount to negating the communist view of history as a fluid dialectical process. Accordingly, an official Soviet analysis of the issues covered in the first 2 chapters of this book would run along these lines, quote, "The present era is dominated by the appearance of the world socialist system. Its emergence is a decisive force of change, not only accelerating the pace of socialist revolution, but also successfully deterring the imperialists from countermeasures. War is therefore no longer inevitable, and peaceful rivalry between the two systems, and especially between the USSR and the United States, is possible. The eventual outcome of the competition is, however, foreordained, given the inherent historical superiority of the communist system. In the meantime, in many areas, more active cooperation is to be sought in order to avert war or to promote economic or social development of the Third World. In some places, the preconditions for the peaceful transition to socialism already exist. In some of the less developed countries, a violent revolution will be necessary, but it would be a tactical error to precipitate it too soon, as urged by the Maoists or the Castroites." It's interesting, isn't it, how on the communist side of things, they were pretty open about it being a world system. And, that was baked into it. I remember learning about that in the Fabian Freeway, how the goal was always to spread this all around the world and bring this world system into being. So that's part of the communist system that I think is being merged with the non-communist system. But the propaganda on the Western side of things is that they want to take over the world, while hiding the plans of the likes of Cecil Rhodes and the Milner Group, and the origins of the Anglo-American establishment's plan to take over the world, as detailed in Tragedy and Hope, Carroll Quigley, and his emphasis on the international bankers and their plan to take over the world. So it's kind of like, in the propaganda given to us, it's the enemies, the bad guys, it's the communists who want to take over the world, not us. But actually, people on both sides want to take over the world, and they look at each other and go, okay, how can we work together to make this happen? We want the same thing here, right? Shannon Ramos says, Institute of World Economy and International Relations, or IMEMO, is an independent research institute based in Moscow. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Okay. Continuing. Authoritative Soviet analysts have argued that they detect signs of intensified crisis in the more advanced capitalist states. Quote, political crises now occur far more often than, let us say, 10 to 20 years ago, and no longer only on the periphery but in the chief centers of imperialism. The socio-political crises in the capitalist states are now spreading under conditions of an exacerbated financial crisis and deterioration in the overall economic situation of the imperialist camp. An important new factor is said to be the growing radicalism of Western intellectuals, the majority of whom, unlike those of the pre-World War II era, are now becoming a more active progressive force. In the Soviet view, this points to the further intensification of the internal crisis of the advanced capitalist world, a factor that is more important than the changes or even the revolutionary upheavals that are likely to occur in the Third World. The decisive equation thus remains that of American-Soviet competition. Accordingly, the crucial operational question leaving, and just as an aside, it makes sense as well that even if there was some kind of competition going on, what tends to happen in a competition is if you reach a stalemate, if the powers are fairly equally matched, or the resources are if there's some sort of balance and one can't quite outdo the other, then they'll merge. Then they'll say, right, well, let's consolidate. The people at the very top of one and the group or corporation and the top of the other one, they can get together and sit around a table because they don't have, I was going to say they don't have skin in the game, but what I mean is that their skin is not at risk, okay? They can have board meetings and make agreements and draft contracts and shake hands and do all these deals about, okay, we'll do this corporate takeover and we'll bring it together at the very top. So it just makes sense that even if these two systems were competing, it's not hard to believe that the people at the who are running them would get together and go, okay, let's merge them, and that'll benefit everybody. Well, not everybody; it'll benefit us. Yeah, us people at the top of both these systems. I'm getting some feedback saying the sound is breaking up a bit and short freeze ups are manifesting. Well, I don't know what can be done about that, I'm afraid. I really don't. Hopefully it will not continue and things will sort themselves out. I think I've got a pretty good connection from my side. I'll check very quickly the old stats bar. Frank says latency returning. But on my side, everything looks pretty good. It's all green. So it might be on your end, Frank, perhaps. I don't know. We'll keep going and see what happens. We have always got the replay to fall back on. So the American-Soviet competition. Accordingly, the crucial operational question, leaving aside immediate tactical considerations, is not whether a given course of action will advance the cause of world communism, but how it will affect the Soviet-American balance in favor of the Soviet Union or against it. The Soviet policymaker senses no contradiction between Soviet interests and those of the international movement, and he thus experiences no ideological embarrassment in assisting anti-American elements otherwise ideologically foreign to communism, or in seeking to reach accommodation with the United States on specific issues. Exactly. So working together to merge. This close subjective identification of purely Soviet state interests with the ideological cause and the resulting goal-oriented flexibility in tactics render impossible the simplistic judgment that the Soviets are either ideologically obsessed or ideologically cynical. Now, of course they're not. They're in it for gain, right? They're in it for money, power, control, and influence. Lee Blunt missing bits of chat here too. Goodness me. Turbs over on Rumble says it's going over there as well. This is ridiculous. In regard to the ideological confrontation, Soviet leaders have ventured the opinion that, quote, the contemporary stage in historical development is distinguished by intense sharpening of the ideological struggle between capitalism and socialism. This conclusion was formally expressed by the Soviet Central Committee in April 1968. It was followed by a systematic development of the proposition that the world is witnessing the rising role of ideology, and that ideological competition in international affairs is gaining in intensity. The Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia in August 1968 gave rise to particularly extensive elaborations of this theme. It was explicitly argued that internal change in Czechoslovakia was abetted by Western policies of peaceful engagement that had as their ultimate objective the transformation of communism into social democracy. This policy was labeled by Soviet writers as the new Western strategy of peaceful counter-revolution. I'll just pause there for a second. Frank says the vision and the sound is out of sync. What is going on? It's the ghost of Zbigniew. He's not giving us a break tonight. Has it got back in sync? Yes or no? Doris says, I think the issue may be streaming to more than one platform at one time. That might be the issue. The only problem with that theory is I've been doing it for 2 years without a problem. And then it's only recently, in the last month, that these problems have started manifesting. So if I'd only just started streaming to multiple platforms, I'd be in agreement with you. Melissa says, carry on. Things like this are going to happen to you since you have the temerity to look for truth in books. Al Murray once says, they don't like your message, Hayes. This is ridiculous, isn't it? Well, I'm recording it, and I will be uploading the recording after the fact if this somehow becomes unwatchable. But I appreciate you sticking it out and hanging in there. You know, and write a strongly worded letter to YouTube and Odyssey and Rumble and OBS and what make is my laptop. See, this is how bad I am at tech. I don't even know what make my laptop is. Razer, R-A-Z-E-R, Razer. It's a Razer laptop. Anyway, so they're talking about how the there's the dialectic of the West versus the East, the communist versus the capitalist system. But then there's propaganda going on both sides saying that they're trying to change one system into the other. And talking about how, and then we know, of course, from the Reese committee hearings that was the plan, and the foundations were working to merge the two systems. But of course, to keep the people in check, to keep them believing in the system, paying into the system, to keep them comfortable with the amount of taxation, with the amount of wealth being taken from them and redistributed, to keep them believing in all that, you gotta come up with a narrative to give them, and the narrative has to be different on each side. Each group of people with their culture and their history and their language has to be given the right narrative that suits them. And this is really the science. This is really the scientific, the science that Alan Watt talks about as being sort of hidden and used. It's the science of managing massive groups of people and populations. And so it's very interesting to read this kind of survey of the arguments on each side and how the systems went from being ready to kill each other to just, now they're just competing with each other, and now they're kind of starting to look like each other, and then they're going to be merged probably in our lifetime. That's what we're going to live through, and that's what we're going to see. So yeah, this bit's a little more interesting actually. But let's get back to the book. The emphasis put on the continuing confrontation between the two conflicting ideological systems, and thus on the notion that contemporary reality can be understood in terms of such a dichotomy, is closely related to the Soviet Union's definition of its own role in international communism and of contemporary communism itself. In spite of the enormous changes in international communism precipitated by the Sino-Soviet dispute, by the decline of Soviet authority, and by the demoralization resulting from the military invasion of one communist state by another, the Soviet leaders have continued to uphold the orthodox concept of a single movement still led by Moscow. They have accordingly continued to press for unity conferences of as many communist parties as possible, even though the results have often worked against unity. They have also continued to assert a dogmatic interpretation of ideology and have consequently been under the necessity of excommunicating those who differ. There's a quote here, footnote, which is, only one social theory, one teaching is capable of expressing the content and direction of world processes in our epoch in depth. This is Marxism-Leninism. Only one philosophy is capable of interpreting all the contradictions of the present stage of historical development. Communists have always regarded Leninism and continue to regard it not as a purely Russian, but an international Marxist doctrine. The foregoing view permits Soviet ideologues to assert that the philosophical thoughts of Mao Zedong are Philistine, often anarcho-idealistic eclecticism, which has nothing in common with Marxist-Leninist philosophy. It should be noted that Rumyantsev and Konstantinov are leading Soviet ideologues. Yeah, so it's division, even in it's divide and conquer, even in the Communist Party. There's conflict and competing factions and no coherent solidarity. But that is the modus operandi of the super parasites, is to divide and conquer, divide and conquer, divide and conquer. So each peoples and each group and each nation and subgroup within that nation is going to get a narrative that suits them, that pushes them along to the desired outcome. And they know how to whip up one group against another group, and they know how to do what Shannon has just said in the chat, bespoke brainwashing. That's a really good phrase. I like that a lot. It is. It's bespoke to each group, each nation, each culture, each time. It is, and we're all going through it no matter what. So if you're in a situation where, let's say, like here in England and Ireland, for example, where Frank is, the forced multiculturalism, the cultural enrichment that we're enjoying, and that's making everything better. If you're in that kind of situation, the people who are being brought in are just as much victims as you are, as the people who are having their towns and villages and cities transformed before your very eyes, right? But the goal is to make you mad at them and not mad at the engineers who've created this situation. They'll have a narrative, you'll have a narrative, and these two narratives are going to be hard to reconcile. There'll be language barriers, cultural barriers. There'll be lies told on both sides, propaganda rolled out on both sides, and the goal will be to destabilize the region by importing a lot of foreign people and making the natives and the foreign people go at each other, right? And people who've organized this event and made it happen, as detailed in books such as Claire Ellis's trilogy, which is, you can't even see it because it's too close to the camera. Claire Ellis's trilogy, The Blackening of Europe, volumes 1, 2, and 3. Really scholarly work done on the situation and the policies and the people who've made it happen. They'll get off scot-free. They'll get lucrative contracts and deals, and they'll carry on flying around the world speaking, and they'll start their own institute, such as Tony Blair, the Tony Blair Institute, and they'll continue working for think tanks and creating policy and just never being held to account. Meanwhile, people are fighting in the streets, and it's getting more and more dangerous, right? And then this is kind of chaos is allowed to happen so that the solution can be rolled out, which will be that digital ID, which will be, if you see something bad happening, log it on this app, take a picture of them, and they'll immediately be locked out of their bank account or have some sort of some amount deducted from their credits, their digital currency. There'll be automatic fines. And this was shown to us in the film Demolition Man, right? Sylvester Stallone and Wesley Snipes, I think, where he is fined on the spot for swearing, and this little machine on the wall is like beep, prints out a ticket, and then he just keeps swearing and he keeps printing out these tickets. That's where it's going. Shannon says they keep us all in our own reality silo. Yeah, again, another fantastic way to put it. And it's done on the individual level because you're in your silo because of the news feed, the content that you consume, and the algorithmic adjustments to what you see. But then there is also the culture, the town, the economic level. If you're working class, middle class, the language, all the different groups you can imagine, the religions, the scientific atheist people, they're all getting a specific bespoke brainwashing narrative. I should say we, because I'm part of it as well. And only by doing the diligent work of reading widely and trying to think your way through vast amounts of information can you break through that. And it's hard. It's much easier to sit back and stick your head into the trough and take what feed they give you. I was trying to do something clever with the word feed there. Because whenever I think of the news feed or the algorithmic feed, I think of a trough and the slop that gets poured into the trough, and then all the farm animals jostling and vying and shoulder to shoulder, scrunched in, trying to scarf up as much of that slop as they can. Like, I think that's the image that comes to my mind when I think of the feed, right? And the content, because the word content as well is such a, what does it mean? I mean, anything can be content, right? So, bit of a side tangent and a rant there. I appreciate Shannon for the good phraseology and terms that I got to use there. Mindhack as well is saying cybernetics, the scientific method of systems and human behavior harvesting. steering and control of worldviews. Yeah, exactly. That's it. It's the study. It's a science. It is a methodology. It's a technique, as Alan Watt would say as well. It's another good word for it. So it's known how this is done, and it is done, and has been done at all times and in all places. So I've well and truly totally lost my place now. Oh yeah, we're just at the top of this page. So the result has been not only the oft-repeated condemnation of revisionists or of Chinese communists, but the increasing intellectual inability to assimilate in doctrine either new revolutionary practice or the progressive evolution of communism in power. The Soviet attitude toward the rebellion of Western youth is a case in point. As soon as it became clear that these young people were not prepared to accept established communist leadership and that their ideologues were critical of Soviet bureaucratism, the Soviet attitude became vehemently hostile. Marcuse was especially attacked for overemphasizing the role of the young and the intellectuals at the expense of the classical concept of a revolution by the working class. In effect, Soviet theorists refused to take seriously into account the potentially revolutionary consequences of the educational upsurge in the developed world. Similarly, when the Castroite revolution in Latin America moved into direct guerrilla action, the established pro-Soviet communist parties objected, and they were supported by Moscow. Here, too, the preference was for the tried, city-based, party-directed proletarian revolutionary model. When Czechoslovak political leaders began to suggest that Leninism, a product of specifically Russian conditions, was perhaps no longer the most suitable guide for the further evolution of Czechoslovak communism, the Soviet reaction was to charge deviation. Thus, in spite of many pronouncements concerning multiple roads to socialism, the Soviet Party has remained wedded to the concept of dogmatic universalism, which is universal only in the sense that it sees the Soviet experience as fundamentally universal in relevance. And I'm really glad to hear as well that Mindhack and Frank are both grabbing copies of the books I just mentioned, the Claire Ellis ones, because I think they're really good. And I don't know how long they'll be for sale, to be quite frank, because, to be frank, there's only one Frank. There can only ever be one Frank. But I've probably told this story before, but when I got this first one, I found it in a secondhand bookshop, and I paid a pretty penny for it, actually. I paid like 25 quid, which is pretty crazy for a secondhand book. They're not usually anywhere near that expensive. But because this one was rare and the topic being what it was, I thought it's going to be worth getting. I've never heard of it, but I'm going to grab that. So I got it. And then I looked online, and I couldn't find any of her books available online at all, anywhere. And so I got in touch with the publisher, which is down here, Arctos. And I kept an eye on the publisher's websites, and I said, hey, when are the books from Claire going to be available? And they just both became available recently, which is why I'm telling people now, snap it up and buy it, because I don't know how long they'll be able to keep printing it and selling it and getting that message out there, but it's worth having the hard copies, or the ebooks as well, also worth, because you can always print out ebook, right? So yes, I'm glad to hear people are getting copies. Shannon says, my worldview has been blown up many times in the last 5 years. Wish I would have found Alan Watt years ago. Yeah, I know that feeling. I only started listening to Alan. Only discovered Alan about 3 years ago. 2 maybe, 2.5. So I had a lot to catch up on, and I'm still catching up. We've got a mention of cybernetics coming up on the next page. I just glanced ahead and saw it. So let's crack on. This is Perspective on Tomorrow. The rigidity both conditions and restricts Soviet thinking about the future. Studies of the future have become both fashionable and widespread in the West. They have involved systematic attempts to link technological projections with social forecasting, as well as with more critical normative discussions. So what comes to mind of that is Limits to Growth, Club of Rome, one of their first publications, and it was a computer model saying how terrible things were going to happen if we didn't kill a bunch of people or get rid of a bunch of people because of the population bomb, Paul Ehrlich. Continuing with the book, though, the philosophical ramifications of scientific discoveries, especially as they pertain to the human being, have become the object of a particularly intense dialogue. The political implications of technology have also attracted the attention of scholars, and increasingly even of political leaders. Given the future-oriented thrust of Marxist thought, one would have expected the Soviet Union to be in the forefront of these investigations and analysis. This has only been partially true. Systematic Soviet efforts to study the future were spurred by high-level decisions taken at the 23rd Party Congress. In its wake, special study groups were established for that purpose in a number of Soviet institutes. For example, the Soviet Academy's Group for Social and Technological Forecasting. In addition, many informal groups were set up to bring Soviet scholars and intellectuals together. A special annual publication entirely devoted to the future of science was established in 1966, and its first numbers have included contributions by both Soviet and non-Soviet scholars. Soviet scholars also established useful contacts with similar study groups and publications in the West, including the United States. So that is another way to see through this dialectic, is that scientists and academics cooperate with each other, and bankers and industrialists cooperate with each other on both sides of these so-called conflicts and competitive competing systems, right? It's what you got to look out for. Similar idea with, Operation Paperclip, bringing Nazi scientists over to work in allied countries and giving them prestigious roles at the top of NASA, for example. There's the conflict, the dialectic is only for the average Joe and Jane in the street, the soldiers who get sent to kill the soldiers of the other side. But at the higher levels, in the scientific elite, the academic elite, the political elite, it's all cooperation, collaboration, deal-making, handshaking, backslapping, belly rubbing, that sort of thing. Solid work has been done by Soviet scholars, primarily in the area of technological economic forecasting. For example, in 1964, the Soviet philosophical journal Voprosi Filosofii began publishing a series of articles on the theme of the scientific technical revolution and its social consequences. On the whole, these articles have been serious and frequently very informative treatments of such subjects as the methodology of forecasting, the organizational problems of science in the context of the scientific explosion, the role of cybernetics, there you go, comparative analyses of scientific development and projections for the United States and the Soviet Union, to say nothing of more specifically Soviet-oriented economic and technological prognoses. So basically, how to control everybody and everything all the time. Because forecasting is a bit deceiving, I think. We think of forecasting, we just think of like trying to guess or trying to predict what's going to happen in the future. But there's another way you could look at it, which is like, if you want to forecast accurately, then you need to lock down and control as much of everything as you possibly can. The more control you have over things, people, resources, systems, all that, the more accurately you can forecast and predict what's going to happen in the future. So this is how businesses operate, right? They need to gather all this data and lock down all their operating procedures and know exactly what's coming in versus what's going out, and then they can forecast out into the future more accurately. So forecasting is dependent upon a high level of control. And control, of course, is the name of the game. It's the continuity of control. That is what we're studying and learning about. And that is also the name of my free email series that you can sign up for at continuityofcontrol.com. It's nice when you get a little organic, unplanned plug of your email series in there. Because I haven't even plugged any of my links or anything so far in this. You know, you got a whole 2 hours without me shilling myself. But it is allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. If at any point you want to support or follow me on the socials, or get involved with my online book club or any of that stuff, all the links are there. And that's pinned at the top of all the chats. So I think you all know where it is by this point. So there's not that much reason for me to repeat it too often, is there? So anyway, back to the book. In contrast to these efforts, there has been a striking paucity of political with projected technological economic changes. There is no doubt that Soviet intellectuals are aware of the unavoidable link between the two, but published Soviet discussions have been limited primarily to critical evaluations of Western literature on the subject in their cruder forms, particularly when appearing in the theoretical organ of the party, Communist. These evaluations have been limited to denunciation. More serious, though, still primarily negative, assessments have appeared in other journals, particularly in the organ of the Institute on World Economics. In both cases, however, the tendency has been to deny the possibility of either the evolution of Western polities into new post-industrial forms no longer determined by the capitalist phase of industrialization, or the capacity of these new forms to overcome the individual crisis of alienation and frustration associated with the capitalist system. This is why some Polish communists, though loyal to the common ideology, have noted critically that, quote, we have to give a more specific answer to the question as to what really happens in modern monopolistic capitalism and what influence the technical revolution has on it. They have observed that communist theory has no concept of the transition from modern capitalist. They have observed that communist theory has no concept of the transition from modern capitalism to socialism, that it has not faced the problem of the increasing technological obsolescence of communist economies as compared to those of the advanced West, that it has still to confront the fact that socialism, though it has proven its mettle in overcoming industrial backwardness, has yet to prove its capacity for scientific innovation, and that it has not given any thought to the significance of conflicts between generations. In a far-ranging and thoughtful discussion, a Romanian communist, appealing for a Marxist theory of the technical scientific revolution, put it even more bluntly. Quote, in recent years, the West has evidenced a more sustained concern with the theoretical elaboration of the essence of the scientific technical revolution and its social and human connections. We cannot as yet speak of the existence of a coherent, unified Marxist theory of the scientific technological revolution. In short, Soviet political thought has failed to provide any systematic development of ideas concerning the future political and ideological evolution of the Soviet system itself, or, for that matter, of the world revolutionary process under novel historic conditions. This is not only because intellectual dissent has been restricted to informal underground forms of expression, but primarily because there has been no open-ended, creative, political, ideological discussion among Soviet Marxists themselves. Soviet ideology is no longer shaped through the creative interaction of theoretical thought and practice, as was the case until Stalin's power became supreme, but is the product of a bureaucratic process of definition, a process entirely monopolized by career party officials. Ideology emanates from the offices of the Central Committee, where it is prepared on the basis of committee reports and staff papers before being submitted to the Politburo for group approval. An ideology whose content is determined by a political process is not likely to be preoccupied with speculative and therefore potentially disruptive issues. It has little to do with intellectual creativity and a great deal to do with bureaucratic imperatives. Paradoxically, bureaucratic sterility in thought prompts intensified emphasis on revolutionary rhetoric and symbolism, because the once revolutionary doctrine has become so intertwined with the vested interests of guardians who are themselves highly sensitive to Russian national interests, there is a tendency to take ideological refuge in increased emphasis on revolutionary symbolism. That word guardians there, is that a reference to Plato, I think? He talked about the guardians, didn't he? The guardian class. The consequence, however, is to congeal certain formulas and claims, making intellectual innovation more difficult, even when on the operational level, ideological restraints are increasingly evaded. The result is a condition of arrested ideological development, of ideological petrifaction rather than erosion, Marxist thought remaining vital only outside the Soviet Union. The vision of tomorrow is reduced to meaningless and increasingly vague declarations, such as the conclusion to the official Soviet prognosis for the remainder of this century. Quote, armed with Marxist-Leninist thought and filled with historical optimism, the leading revolutionary forces of the world will march into the future. How is audio and video, everybody? Mindhack says there's nothing wrong with examining your beliefs and behavior. I agree. That's very good. Very well said. And there's nothing wrong with it. And in fact, it's probably a good idea to do that regularly and really get in there and dig into it and try and understand where your beliefs come from and what's driving your behavior. Because we've all been subject to indoctrination, brainwashing, propaganda, mind control. It is just unavoidable in this day and age. So you got to get in there and dig into it and find out what is really you. What parts of you are really you, and what parts of you have been downloaded and implanted well, I think they're the only two methods, don't they? Really, you either download or someone else implants it in you. Download it or implant it. I'm just going to leave it at that. So this last section it's been kind of interesting, but nothing too juicy or meaty to get into there, I don't think. It's kind of a survey of the divide and conquer that occurs in any group, because you can't have any one group or ideology ever becoming so powerful. So there always needs to be subgroups and splinter groups and competing interests and power plays, so that if you need to, you can destabilize the group. This is how control is maintained, I think. It's kind of all well and good. You fund the communists and you let them take over this particular area, but then you also need to keep them under control. So you got to have people ready to stir up discontent within the group that you've created, through the funding and all the other ways by which you support these kind of groups to take over and gain power and control. It's kind of like an insurance policy. If you allow them to get too powerful and gather too much steam and support and momentum, you might lose control. So you need to have a plan to divide and divide and conquer every time, and that needs to go all the way down. So it's a very crafty, kind of clever way of maintaining control at all times. That kind of sounds like that last section was describing that to me. The survey of different scholars and different thinkers and what each side of these competing systems, right? Celine Lyon says, just tuning in a bit late. Is there an issue with the audio again? Yeah, apparently there is. It's lagging on YouTube now. I can see that it's lagging really far behind on YouTube, which doesn't usually happen. It's usually only Odyssey where it does that, and now it's on YouTube and Rumble as well. So not only have we failed to fix the Odyssey problem, but it's now doing it on both. The advice that I got from the Odyssey person who was trying to help me fix it has clearly made the problem worse. I'm going to have to try and do some test live streams this week to see what I can do settings-wise that will prevent this problem from happening. Because if I look at my stats bar, everything is green on this side. I'm only using less than 30% of my CPU, so there's plenty of memory and data. Tubbs is saying, I don't usually pay attention to the screen, so the delay doesn't matter. That's good. Yeah. And I have thought about whether or not the actual visual representation of what I'm doing here really adds much value, but I like to include it just so you can see that the things I'm reading are actually written down in the book and not just quotes that I've made up and claims that I'm concocting out of thin air. So yeah, we are having problems tonight. I apologize. It's way behind. The video is way behind. I shut the book probably about 5 minutes ago, and it's still showing me holding the book open. It's Halloween. What do you expect? So that last section, is sort of like intellectualizing the whole thing, because it was pretty hard to follow, I thought. And it's lots of people giving different accounts and different narratives that you can either believe or not believe, when the truth of it is that both systems were under control by the same people, and the plan was to merge them together at some point. And as I've said before, each system is like an experiment. We'll run this system for a while and see how people do under that and how much we can exploit them and squeeze out of them, how close we can get them to breaking point without actually pushing them over the edge into, the total catastrophe. And we want to keep them working. We want to dumb them down, keep them working, keep exploiting them. But they have to have a certain level of functionality so that they can do the jobs to some degree. So we can't dumb them down too much and insult their physical integrity too badly. But at the same time, we don't want them strong and capable of critical thinking and having robust mental strengths and physical strengths, right? We need to keep them weak, in a state of weakness, and they're easy to manage that way. So we run one system here, we run another system in this place, and when we monitor it and we see how it goes and we design the next system and we walk them, nudge them into the next system. I'm reminded of a graph that Dr. Sean Baker shared on Instagram today, and it was about Japan, and it was showing how when rice consumption per capita went down, heart disease or life expectancy went up. I think it was life expectancy went up. It's a really interesting graph because you think of this part of the world is they cultivate rice and they eat that with their meal, and it's a real staple part of the diet. But actually, what happened was he was saying that the Japanese wanted to get an army together, but everyone was too short. So they started introducing red meat into the diet, and then people got bigger and stronger, and they were able to form an army. So I mentioned this because that's another part of it. It's like you got to limit people's access to certain foods. You got to make sure that they're eating a lot of kind of artificial preservatives and GMO type stuff so that they're alive, but they're not too alive, right? They're not too full of vitality and energy. You want them sort of a bit weakened, a bit docile, a bit dumbed down, but with enough energy to perform the tasks that you can then pay them for, that you can then take money off them from in the name of taxation, right? So something like I saying, it's kind of hard to follow. I'll give you a like, and maybe the playback will play better. Yes, what I will do is upload the replay, which I've recorded, and that should be a flawless, faithful rendition of what we've captured and covered tonight, because, yeah, the replay is looking unwatchable at this point. So that's frustrating, but it happened in Halloween, so I'm not too surprised. I'll probably wrap it up in that case, I think. I'll wrap it up, and I'll get this replay up to all the channels very soon. If not tonight, then early tomorrow. This is frustrating, isn't it? But we will fix it. We will persevere. We will find the correct settings so that this doesn't happen again. I'm a bit frustrated that I actually made it worse tonight. But that's what happens when you experiment and you don't have time to do practice live streams. So I'm going to wrap it up there, I think. I'm going to wrap it up there. Instead of plowing on when people can't hear me and see me properly. Yes, Shannon, evil is afoot today. So we're probably lucky that we even got 2 hours and 40 minutes done. So we'll be grateful for what we have been able to do. And that was actually a pretty good place to stop, because we're right on the edge of the next section, which is going to be the Soviet future. And who knows what is going to happen and what we're going to read in that bit. We're almost coming up on the halfway point in the book now. So yeah, nothing too spicy and amazing and mind-blowing tonight. I feel like it was really just Zbignew's account of communism and an insight into 1960s Soviet society. I think the purpose of this kind of book is to not reveal the truth behind these systems, who runs them, who funds them, who designed them, who commissioned them, who rolls them out. The point is that you got this narrative to believe that these systems just arise organically and people rise up and people have revolutions, and it just is one of those things that occurs from time to time. It's really just laying down the historical narrative for the common person to believe, I think. And he's doing a masterful job of it, because it is quite convincing. It's academic. It sounds very, oh yeah, he knows what he's talking about. He's using lots of long sentences, and he's referring to, he's clearly well read. He's referring, he's backing it up with a lot of sources and reference material. But I think ultimately is running cover for the truth of what the actual reality of these systems truly is. So that's my closing remarks, I think, for tonight. Good luck with the rest of your Halloween. May your electronic devices function properly. Hope your evening hasn't been too disturbed by people ringing the doorbell, small people ringing the doorbell demanding chocolate. And I appreciate you hanging out with me and persevering despite the technical difficulties. I'm going to get some practice. You might see me going live at some point during the week. If you do, pop in, say hi. But it will most likely be some sort of test live stream. So don't be expecting anything like a proper presentation. But we'll be back next Friday, giving it another go, continuing with the book. Don't forget, if you can't wait till then, you can join us in the book club on Wednesday night. We do the Wednesday night private live streams on a totally different platform that doesn't rely on any of the stuff that I do on Friday night. So they are flawless, and you can join in, say hello, participate in the reading. We're wrapping up the first global revolution. We're almost done with it now. We actually have exactly 33 pages left. I kid you not. So we're going to be doing the last 33 pages of that on Wednesday night inside the book club. $12 a month, $97 for the year. That is the price for that at the moment. And or you can shoot me an email, sign up to the socials, share the links, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Make the number go up. That always helps. The other thing I've done is I've been making lots of shorts, YouTube shorts, these 2-3 minute clips, and I've scheduled them to go out every day for the next 3 weeks or so. So if you see those pop up in the news feed, you can always give them a thumbs up and a share and a comment or whatever. That helps massively as well to just raise awareness of the channel and get it to the right people, because I'm sure there are many people out there who would be interested in these books and who can tolerate me rambling my way through them for a couple of hours on a Friday. So yeah, all your support and kind generosity and attention and time is deeply appreciated, and I love you all very much for being here and helping me out. So thank you. I'm going to wrap it up there. I will hang out in the comments for a little bit as I play you out, hopefully with some guitar music that won't be too distorted and won't suffer from too much buffering. So we'll get to that right now. So take it easy, everybody. Have a lovely weekend. Have a good week. I'll see you all very soon on the next one. And the only thing left to say, as always, is God bless.